GM friends, and welcome to this Future of Gaming deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive in one of my personal favorite parts of Web3 gaming, and that is on-chain or crypto-native games. To do that, we've gathered 3 FOGDAO members that are actually building one of these on-chain games. We have David Amor, co-founder and CEO of Playmint. We have Yijia. Can you remind me your last name, Yijia?
Chen.
Yeah, Chen, I knew that. Co-founder and CEO of Curio. And then we have Heimdall, aka Connor Skific, who is the chief economist at Citadel. All of these projects are building on-chain. I would suggest... one more thing. So I'm a bit... so my lungs are kind of hurting, and I'm a bit sick. So I'm going to be on mute quite a bit and coughing my lungs out. So I expect you guys to have a chat and catch any silences and ask each other questions. That'd be great.
My experience is that on-chain games guys will just keep talking to each other indefinitely. So we're probably good. Probably good crowd of people.
It's on-chain, so it's permanent, right?
Exactly.
That was a bad joke. Good. Let's start with some intros first. I think that makes sense. So maybe like a short background on yourself, and then in the same breath, you can talk a bit about what you're building, and then we can go into why all of this is so exciting. David, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah. So I started making games in the early 90s, Electronic Arts, and then spent a long time there. Then built lots of games companies across, PlayStation, mobile, and a couple of years ago, I guess now, we built a company around Web3 games and really sort of almost immediately started building on-chain games. And our first was a game based on Loot, an on-chain game that ran on Ethereum. And since then, we've been building an MMO called Dawnseekers.
Cool. I can go next. My name's Yijia. I am co-founding Curio. And previously, I came from mostly tech background, so backend and AI. And me and my co-founder started looking into crypto in early 2021, and then got interested in fully on-chain games later half of 2021, where we saw a bunch of really early on-chain MMO games that were fairly successful, and that put everything, including their logic, on-chain. And we thought that, okay, that's the first step towards allowing players to contribute further and to have a deeper experience than traditional games. And we kind of want to take that step further to really fully allow user-generated logic. And that's why we're here.
Fantastic. I know.
Yeah, my name's Connor. I go by Heimdall. I'm the economist at Citadel Game. I got into the crypto space back in 2017. I think when a lot of people did, there was that huge ICO boom. Everybody, got super interested in crypto at that time. Kind of forgot about it for a couple of years. I heard about NFTs, and specifically when I heard about NFTs and like on-chain gaming, like sort of around when Wolf Game was coming out, I got super interested. That's when I was like, I see the potential of NFTs, because until then I'd only heard about like PFP projects and stuff like that. It wasn't very interesting to me, but I kind of deep dove in. I played every single on-chain game, every single Wolf Game clone that there was. Definitely lost a couple bucks here and there, but it was really fun. And, it was like a whole new, every single day, it was a whole new economic experience getting launched, and then like Weimar Germany, inflation happening and dying within a couple of weeks. So this is such a super exciting space. But yeah, so here I am a year later.
Here's an observation. I'm the only games industry guy, at least, that come from the games industry. And I noticed this quite a lot about people building on-chain games. It's people that have come from other places that are sort of redefining what games are. I think that's interesting that it's usually new people to this world rather than people that have been making games before. Maybe that's what makes these games a bit different.
Yeah. In terms of background though, like I did grow up playing a lot of video games, and I also was a huge Warcraft 3 modder. So I didn't specifically develop games, but I was very interested in game design for a long time. Yeah.
Why do you think that is, David? The fact that, because I've actually observed the same. I would say that Playmint is by far the most experienced games team in the world building actually on-chain games. And I'm just curious, why do you think that's, out of the, I don't know how many teams are, I think there's less than 50 building this. I would say there's like 40 of them have mostly like non-game native teams.
Yeah, I think it's because building an on-chain game, you have a lot of constraints. And let's say that you're used to making PlayStation games or mobile games, whatever. The design space is pretty rich. You know that you're going to be using Unity. You're going to be using Maya. You know how to use all these things. You know how to create a great experience. And then if you're trying to build an on-chain game, you go, well, you can forget all that. You can't use any of those things, those tools, and that experience doesn't work. I mean, it does somewhat, some of those things, but you really have to take 100 steps back if you're used to making PlayStation games, and now you're trying to build an on-chain game. And I think that's maybe that's unsettling if you take pride in your ability to make great games, and now those skills that you've developed to have less value in the on-chain game world. So maybe something to do with that. It's tough. I mean, it's really building from first principle.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, which is like, on one hand, it's like on-chain game takes away some of the best tools that traditional game studios get to kind of making their great games. And at the same time, I think we're so early in the space that like it's quite hard actually to tell a traditional game team why like on-chain game is better for their game compared to what if it's built off-chain. Like the benefit is not extremely clear at the moment yet. And I think like the great on-chain games are only going to appear, from this year and beyond. We're all building.
And I'm sure we'll get to it later, but like I think a challenge is that there aren't really any frames of reference for what an on-chain game can be yet. I mean, we're all just figuring that out. And so if you're a game maker and I'm saying, come on, make a game like this, well, we don't have much to point to just yet. I mean, we're all building interesting projects there, but they're all sort of borderline experiments that are starting to become games. And I suppose if you're a traditional game maker and you're saying, oh, this is the kind of stuff that we're going to be building, well, it's still pretty primitive compared with a PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, and PC games.
It's primitive compared to pretty much all games. We can be honest here, David. It's a safe space.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Yijia, I'd love to get your take on, like, a few points or a few reasons why putting game logic on the blockchain, putting the game state on the blockchain excites you. What kinds of things does this open up? Why should anyone think about ever doing this?
Yeah, that's basically the key question of this space, I think. So I think for us, or like how I think about it is game logic. Most of the games actually don't need to put their game logic on chain, and one of the biggest benefits of doing so is actually you get a lot of composable user-generated logic that can be plugged in and into the game, which makes the game more desirable or playable for other players, right? So an example of this is, let's say you want to configure your game so that something happens when someone, let's say, transfers some in-game resource to another player, right? Or like perhaps transfers that to a building to upgrade it. Something like that cannot happen in the, like, suppose you're, suppose the smart contracts powering your game, that it cannot happen if your game engine is not open and is not like completely executed in a verifiable way, right? If we think about the existing blockchain games today, like most of the play to earn games and a lot other games that involve assets, the reason why they cannot really like take in player input, for example, whether it's players like adding new entities in the game or defining the like custom relations or signing a pact with another player, like a custom alliance. These things are very difficult, if not impossible, to do if the game state is not on chain. Yeah.
Could you perhaps then? I think this is a perfect segue to just talk about Treaty, what you've built, what you allow for player interaction and programmability, because I think it's really interesting and something we should definitely highlight.
Yeah, so we actually launched Treaty, the first version, this week, and Heimdall has been a very strong player in the game. So that's So we did a lot of thinking in kind of what we allow players to change in the game or to contribute in the game, because there's always the question. I'm sure David knows better than me on this. Like the question of game balance and user generated logic and how these two kind of balances out. How do you allow people to modify the game state and like the game rules in a way that doesn't affect the collective experience and the objective gameplay experience, right? So there's a couple options. I think the first is directly allowing people to change game physics. There's quite a bunch of people talking about having a very coherent game physics for kind of these persistent worlds that just run forever, right? Or run for a very long period of time. That is a very, I think, like a very good ideal to have perhaps for the end game. But I think at this stage, like if we look at all the Web 2 games, right, there's almost no example of a game whose physics hasn't changed at all and which is continually able to attract players, right, with its novelty and such. So that's very hard. Now, we could also let people kind of add custom blocks or building blocks to the game, right? Let's say, they can add like a door that only opens to whitelisted players. And that's also, so the problem with that is it directly impacts game balance. You can imagine someone declaring a block that declares themselves victorious, right? And it's just like it gets very difficult to control these things. So the answer we came to is treaties, which is essentially people get to define the in-game relations. For example, can you still hear me, by the way?
We lost you for a bit, but continue. Go ahead.
Yeah. So then we settled on this idea of treaties, which is the ability to define in regards to your rights to transfer your assets in the game and the rights to call certain functions such as move your own armies, right? Using these rights to games, you can transfer these to other players, just like in the real world, like how real world treaties are made, right? So for example, like a simple example is non-aggression pact, where it literally prevents two players from attacking each other for a certain period of time. And this, in on-chain games, this can actually be enforced in a meaningful way compared to in a Web 2 game where alliances are often very, very much non-binding, right? And you can imagine more and more examples where people use their in-game resources and rights to game functions and build on top of the existing game logic and make social contracts with each other, right, in the form of supported by smart contract. So that's something that really excites us. And, we've kind of already seen some examples of these. Like there's some treaties in the current game that are proposed by players. So for example, a loan agreement. And we'll add more support for this for a much more vibrant system from this point on.
Yeah, can I jump in there, because I know that when you say physics, what you mean by that, I think, because I think it's a term that's used with other people building on-chain games, isn't physics in the way that we think the physics that exist in a PlayStation game where you throw something up and it comes down. What you mean is physics as a set of rules that dictate how the game works. Is that correct? Is that a good definition? So I think that what you're talking about there, because we experience this too, is you're saying, okay, which things in this world that we create, in this game that we create, can players modify, and which things can't they? Physics being the set of rules that nobody gets to change. So we talk about a similar idea where we have the base layer of our game, and that base layer is where the physics live, and it's immutable. You can't, as somebody that's building in our world, you can't change those things. And then you have a set of things on top that can be modified. So I think, is it correct to say that in treaty, you have treaties that exist in the part where you can alter the way that the game works? Is that how you describe it or how you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. Like, for example, a player cannot just generate gold out of thin air, but what they can do is to use their existing gold and kind of stake it in a pool that someone else created that generates some kind of revenue. So yeah, that's exactly right. And I like how you kind of differentiated real world physics from in-game physics. Like it doesn't have to be the same thing or even close. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that when sometimes I think the hardest thing about building on-chain games is we really struggle to articulate what it is that's different about this compared with other games, and sometimes we get caught up in terminology and we mean one thing and somebody thinks we're talking about something different. So I think really like one of the biggest challenges right now is I think as on-chain game builders we all understand why what we're doing is fundamentally different from games before it, but articulating that in a way that people understand is like the toughest thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yijia, yeah, it's funny. I've been playing the game probably for 3 days straight now, and I never really thought about it like that. That it's basically like fluid logic changes dictated by the players. That's pretty cool. That you guys are doing that.
Yeah.
And Yijia, I have a question for you. I mean, I've played a little bit, but I haven't created a treaty myself. Those treaties between players, do you have to write code to set up that treaty, or is there some sort of UI in game or a set of rules? I mean, how easy is it for players to make treaties?
Yeah, so at this stage, we actually have we have pre-built treaty templates that are either written by us or by players that are smart contracts, which people can fork and deploy and interact with in the game UI. So in terms of interaction, it's pretty straightforward, but at this stage, they can't not write any code and kind of deploy their own treaty. Now, in the future, I think there's a couple of things that are very low-hanging fruit. For example, if we can have treaty templates such as non-aggression pact and a treaty with whitelist, and if you combine these two, you get a non-aggression pact that needs to be joining needs to be whitelisted, right? And we'll also have better support for like people submitting smart contracts during the game. But yeah, I think for the next at least 6 months or so, like the bulk of the logic creation will probably require writing code. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. So, in difference with our game is that everything is upgradable in our contracts, but of course, our game uses a DAO. So basically, players can vote. All the contracts are upgradable. So if we wanted to change the name of the token, even we could change that, which I think is pretty interesting. Because if we're building a game to last for a very long time, as things can last for a very long time on the Ethereum, it's almost like you do want it to be fully upgradable because things are going to evolve over time. The game logic, the ability for
like to correct the thing.
Yeah. Gaming on the blockchain is going to evolve over time, so you want your game to be almost able to evolve over time, right? Instead of having to launch like a new game, in theory. So that's kind of like what we're thinking.
I'm going to answer Nico's question why I think building on chains interesting and why we're doing it. And like I get asked a lot, so I need to have a good answer for this question. For us, it's and by the way, there's no right answer. That's one of the things that makes it interesting. But for us, at least, there are two things that I think are interesting about building an on-chain game. Bear in mind that we're building an MMO. It's a sort of simple MMO, but it's an MMO insofar as it has a bunch of characters exploring a map, upgrading, going on battles, etc. Now, the first thing I think is interesting about an on-chain game is that game world that we create, not the gameplay in it, but the game world itself, now runs on a blockchain, it runs on Ethereum, and it's never going to disappear. It's a game world that we create. We're the gods of this world. We might create it, but then we just let go. We cut the umbilical cord, and it lives forever. And there's something a bit magical about this world that lives forever, that people can play games in, have experiences, and it's never going to disappear. Also, I mean, I take Heimdall's point that you probably will take a while to make that world perfect. But at some point in time, we make it immutable. We no longer have the ability to upgrade this world. And at that point, the world that we create lives forever. This digital world lives forever, and it cannot be altered for better and worse. And I think there's something pretty cool about a game world that lives forever, and what started as hours as a company. We might have built it, but ultimately it becomes everybody's. Everybody lives in this world, and it's owned by everybody. It's like owned by nobody. Now that's the first thing, which I think is almost like a philosophical point, which is a cool democratic world that we all live in. The second one is that is your point, Yijia, about composability. So this point that if you're a builder, then you can create any functionality that bolts onto the experience that we create. You can create either augment the functionality of the game that we create by having, building a trading post at this point on the map that does something slightly different, or creating a treasure hunt, or creating a casino. These are things that we don't build ourselves, but because the game logic and all the rules are sitting there on chain, then we encourage people to add new functionality to the game. And I think that we've seen that to some degree with Roblox, obviously hugely successful, but that's quite limited in what you can do. You can only do the things that Roblox allow you to do, and you can only it's heavily curated, heavily taxed. And here we're saying, as long as it conforms to the physics of the world, to use your word, Yijia, then it's going to work. And whether I like it or not, you're free to deploy it. It's completely permissionless. And if people like it enough to spend money on, then the money goes to you. It doesn't go to us as the gods of the world. So I think those are the two main things that I'm excited about. It's a game world that lives forever and is immutable. And the second thing is, it's a game world where people can either augment the game experience that we create, or have completely different game experiences that run side by side of whatever we create there. And I don't think we've ever seen that in a game before. So it's super primitive right now. Really, it's very, very difficult to build these games. And I describe an MMO, but it looks a lot different from Zelda, let's say, because there are tons of constraints. But we can still see it working even at this sort of embryonic stage. And I can see how, where we can go from here. So to me, it's a really interesting new category of the games industry that's just starting.
Heimdall, you want to take this chance and tell us a bit more about Citadel? Because I'm kind of starting to see like slightly different approaches in the way permissionless building works, and exactly what you're allowing builders to adjust within your game world. But for that, I'd love to get your quick intro on Citadel.
Yeah, so Citadel is a fully decentralized pixel spaceship MMO on the Ethereum blockchain. It's a fully on-chain game state and logic, fully upgradable contracts, all managed by the DAO after launch. After launch, the team becomes part of the community. So we're really building for the long term here. We've been building in public for a year now, keeping the community involved, taking all their feedback, all their ideas, integrating them as much as we can into the project, because we really want to create the sense that the community is the stewards of this project into the future, and it's fully malleable, fully adjustable, can grow with the times. Not only that, it's transparent, it's accountable, it gives the players agency to create. Of course, it's not permissionless. You need to make proposals, but as long as it's a good idea, and as long as the code is good and been audited and all these things, and it's good for the economy, I'm sure people will vote for it. So it's a way, and people can technically build permissionlessly also, because they can make things with the assets that are outside of the game. They could be an off-chain mini game, or their own on-chain game that use the same assets, or any of the above. But so that's essentially what we're trying to do is a fully decentralized kind of game modding community, and in the kind of sort of like the Warcraft 3 modding community, or DayZ modding community, or any of these modding communities that were super successful, that had all these games spawn off of an original base layer game or minimum viable game. So yeah, that's basically what we're doing.
So to pitch it back to you, the founding team essentially builds this world, which is let's say a simple game loop with assets with an economy. And the moment you launch it, it becomes public, owned by the DAO. And you, as a core founding team, if you want to do some additions, you would have to make a proposal, send it to the DAO, and only if the DAO approves, or majority, or whatever, how you do it, the code and the functionality is actually added to your game.
Exactly, yeah. So it has to be approved majority vote by the community. Yeah, pretty much everything has to go through the community. They have full power. So we retain like a minor veto power, but that's actually owned by the community also, so they can remove it. And we pre-wrote the proposal for them to remove it. So we have very minimal power actually over the community. That's pretty, I think, idealistic, but you know, I think that's Web3, right? We're idealistic here.
It reminds. We built a game in the Lootverse at the beginning of last year, and one of the things I didn't understand how it would work is if you allow anything, if anybody can build anything for the Lootverse. So my question, I wonder, well, how do you decide what is in the Lootverse when anybody can make anything? And what I learned from that was that the projects which are exploitative or bad or people didn't like, then they just sort of withered and died, and nobody talked about them, and then they weren't part of the experience. And I think that in a way, I imagine something similar happens here, where there's bits that people build. How do you govern this permissionless world? What I think happens, at least in our game, is people sure can build whatever they want, and they can sort of load up the experiences that the people have created. If they like them, then they'll play them. Maybe they'll spend money on them. If they don't, then they'll just get ignored. And so I think that what the game becomes is what the community decides the game is. And as I say, that I guess was one of my key learnings from Loot. I'm surprised at how well that worked. Nobody was in any debate what was part of the Lootverse or what wasn't. Nobody even talked about it. So I think maybe that's how it works with permissionless building in on-chain games.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I think the weight of community is like definitely so much higher for this space compared to the past. Like, yeah, I think that part's pretty clear.
Yeah. I mean, and I think this is one of the fundamental things that's different about it. And bear in mind, so we come from a world where we would release a game and then live operate a game. And by that, I mean, we would come out with new levels, and we'd have Halloween event, an Easter event, and Christmas event. And, we'd keep the game fresh, but in a relatively predictable way. Here, and with a relatively contained team, like, they have 10 people making let's say, a mobile game that you're live operating. Here, when you give the keys to everybody, then you're saying build whatever you want, and as many people as you want can build, and you can build whatever you want, provided it conforms to the rules, the physics of the game. And I genuinely have no idea what way this game is going to be, where the gameplay is going to go, what the community is going to like. Are they going to like the parts that we create, or do they prefer the bits that other people in the community has created? And to Heimdall's point, there's like parity, just like in Citadel, there's parity. So we're builders alongside the community builders. There's no sort of elevated status for us as the people that originally created the world. No, we're builders alongside everybody else. And I like that sort of democracy. If it sucks, people won't play it. If it's cool, then they will. And so there becomes almost like self-optimizing gameplay. There are lots of people building lots of stuff. The things that aren't any good, people, whether it's from us or others, won't get played and won't have any money spent on it.
Yeah, and I think to echo your point, the players know what's good, right? They know what's fun. Just like in Warcraft 3, I don't know. I never played the original game. I only played the mods because that's what was fun. The original game was kind of boring to me. So I think that you're totally on point, that the players will know what's good and those games will survive and grow,
David, could you elaborate on how you practically see that work? So you have your game. Let's say it's a browser-based game. You load into it in the browser, and then there are parts of the game that are good, parts of the game that are bad, parts of the game that are created by you, parts of the game that are created by others. Like, how practically does that work, and how can I choose which one I want to play or interact with?
Yeah, that's a good question that truthfully we were asking ourselves up until a few months ago. So I think that if you build an on-chain game, that pitch this on-chain game, and because it's on-chain, then people can write code that connects with our game, as I've just been describing, but how in practice? Like, how does that really work? And if you just, how do I, as a builder, now have things that show up in game? And that's not, I don't think you get that for free. I think you have to accommodate it as the people that build the original experience. You have to plan for that. So specifically, I'll try and paint a picture. Our game is an MMO. It's a sort of, if you can picture a landscape with buildings in it and characters moving from building to building, and sort of like a 30,000 feet view of this game world. And as a player, what I can do is build a building in the world and attach a smart contract to it. In fact, attach a web page that links to a smart contract. So let's imagine that I click on this building on the map, up pops a window like an overlay, and in that is a web page with a bunch of buttons in it. Let's imagine it's the casino example, and then and it says, do you want to bet? Do you want to spend 10 gold to enter the casino? And then if I press yes, then it shows me an interface, moves to the next web page, which is input boxes for me to stake my, to gamble my wood or iron that exists in the game. But these are connected to smart contracts that affect the game state, the game logic and the game state in the world. So it gives players an interface, and it's deliberately pretty flexible. We're saying that's a web page. It could just say "Hello World." It could be whatever you want, and but that's how that works in practice. And then to other point, which is, well, how do I, as a player, decide which parts of the that other people have built show up in the game? Otherwise, it looks just like a 1,000 different things going on at once. And some of those things are going to be good, some of them are bad. So in practice, there's a central, well, it's not centralized, it's a decentralized list of things that exist in the world, and you tick them as you want to see them. So if you hear as a player that hey, someone's built a casino, then I can see on the list, sure enough, there's a casino. I know any time anybody's placed a casino, then that becomes available for me as a player to use. And it still exists for all players. It's just like the door is unmarked, to try and use a sort of map analogy. You can, to really get the functionality, maybe when I click on that building, it says, hey, if you want to see what's inside, then you need to, there's a check mark to add in the plugin that has a casino. So all of these things exist in the world, and by default, we might show a set of things, but then it's up to the player to decide what other functions they want to see. And that means that players can have different visualizations of what's going on. They can decide what parts they want to take part in.
Do people need a... Yeah,
go ahead.
Just a question on, like, do people need to write so the smart contracts are like people wrote them, right? And then uploaded to the website and then kind of linked to the whatever object in the game.
Correct, yeah. So I think that we're still at a point. That's what I mean. It's why I asked you the question, Yijia, because it's something that we talk about. And is that is there a no-code or is there a low-code option for people that want to build but don't know Solidity? Because obviously that's that limits the amount of people that can contribute as builders. And I think and often people talk about Roblox as an example where you have lots of builders. That isn't a no-code solution either. You need to know Lua. You still need to know a programming language. But I still think that we as on-chain game makers, if we really want to encourage the builders, if we really want to encourage this idea that people can expand the functionality of the game, then we really need to try and make it as easy as possible for people to get something simple in game. So today, that's in practice, that's us with a bunch of sample smart contracts to show how to do things. But in time, what I'd like to try and do is create tooling that allows people to build content without writing a line of code. I don't think we start there, but I think that if we really want to get offer building to a wider set of people, then we can't demand that people need to program. I don't think. But as I said, Roblox has had huge success, and that requires programming if you're a builder. So don't know exactly how that important it is, but I certainly think trying to accommodate builders in a way that they can easily it's just, I want something immediately rewarding that builders can do, even if it's something pretty simple.
I think in terms of our community, because I think, yes, solidity is a huge barrier for most people to contribute. But I think in terms of ours, I think we're hoping for people to kind of gather together like a normal community. So like somebody might not know how to build a house in a community, but that, or like say the architect has a vision for the idea of a house, but doesn't know how to build it. And then he gets the guy who can build the house, right? And then they get together and they're like, wow, we built this thing together. This is amazing. And, it makes the whole community better, right? It adds value.
For sure,
So
yeah.
maybe people will get together in pods, artist gets together with Solidity developer and, another guy who has the ideas. And this may even happen via somebody making a proposal that's relatively well written. It doesn't have the code attached to it, but it does get passed. And somebody who's a Solidity developer in the community sees that and says, I want to build that, and then they get together. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for sort of a natural development cycle that's similar to real life, once you build this sort of structure.
Yeah, I wonder whether or not, let's say that you have to write code right now in order to add functionality to an on-chain game. Of course, somebody could create a tool that spits out that code. So it's not, you might have a user interface. It's a tool that's an easy user interface that spits out Solidity code that does a thing. So now in the community, there's a tool that makes it more approachable for builders that doesn't necessarily come from us. So I don't know how important that is yet. Maybe something that's created by the community.
I was going to say chat GPT.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think there's another kind of tangential angle to looking at on-chain games, which is it's kind of some people think it's an extension of MEV, where it's another scenario where a lot of people code to gain certain advantage in a game-like fashion, and certainly there's some truth to it because on-chain games, if built actually openly and permissionlessly, could integrate the many DeFi primitives that are already built. And if the game developer takes a deep tokenization approach, for example, tokenizing all of the in-game assets as like ERC20s or 1155s, then it can actually leverage these existing DeFi primitives. And I think there's I'm this is something that we discuss as well a lot about, which is kind of who are we building for, right? Is it for these super crypto native technical but small but very active group of degens, very hardcore people, or more so for the broader audience who probably don't know how to code, don't know Solidity, may not even have a wallet at the moment, or is it something in the middle, right? And I think there's different choices that needs to be different actions that need to be taken for each group on this.
Well, and it's not. It depends when as well, right? So I think if you told me that in 3 years' time the only people playing an on-chain game was a degen, then I think as a group of on-chain game makers we failed. But this year, I think it's okay to start with people that understand what we're doing and work out some of the UX kinks and the UI kinks and a bunch of other things. So, I think over time it becomes more approachable to people that are less crypto native.
Yeah. I think one thing that could be very interesting is it seems like all of us are thinking about composability and user generated logic in a way, and something that could be very important in my opinion is kind of almost like a app store pre-scan security feature for kind of user generated logical pieces or smart contracts, because if you truly build expose your game as a giant API to people, you cannot avoid some malicious content, right? That kind of hurts other players in an unfair way. So, but then you also don't want to censor any content manually, right? So, kind of what's the good balance there? How do you perhaps use a automatic fuzzer to test what the worst thing could happen with each piece of user generated content? That's something that is really interesting to us.
Yeah, and you see, but then, and this is again something that we talk about in our team as well. You've just, if I understand what you're describing, you've just introduced a point of centralization. So if somebody is curating the content and checking for penises and swastikas, then which might be a very legitimate thing to be checking for. But now the game isn't decentralized. Now there's somebody that's checking for that content and deciding yes, you can go and you can't. It's no longer permissionless.
I think
What
it's
if it's a
how
DAO
you do it.
managing that?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
It
sorry.
could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. It could be like one part. It could be an automated strategy. The other, it could be opened to the community to control. Like, what's the extent? So, yeah.
So while I was on mute, coughing here by my desk, a few observations I made and a few like interesting things I'd love to get your thoughts on. One, hearing you guys talk about the design space that you open up when you allow for user-generated logic versus the permissionlessness, it sounds like giving people or builders or your community unlimited user-generated logic and unlimited power in even changing the physics with full permissionlessness is probably a bad idea, because then we get in the situation that we just talked about where they can put in the penises and the swastikas and the frauds contracts and steal all your NFTs, right? And it's, if you for example look at Citadel is a game that's essentially allows for unlimited user-generated logic, but it is permission because the DAO needs to agree on what you do. And so you get this graph of one angle you have the level of complexity that your logic can, and impact that your logic can have on the game state, and then on the other you have the amount of like the permissionlessness. And so as you increase in complexity and you open up the design space of the logic that users can do, you seem to decrease in permissionlessness. Is that a fair? Is that fair? Do you guys agree with that?
That's. Yeah, I think generally it's true. But I don't think as game developers we necessarily have to kind of like it. I don't know if it's like the questions to ask, because I think ultimately players care about the game experience. And for example, even when players are creating, right, it's a lot of times about kind of how many dimensions can I create in this game. For example, can I play with the assets inside the game? Can I deal with like my delegations to certain rights, right? As opposed to like, oh, like how many, but like how decentralized is this game? Like I think very few players actually ask that exact question, and I think there's many ways to define like permissionlessness. And I sometimes just like to point out that like the way we think about permissionlessness is not quite the same as a lot of players, and oftentimes they want additional functionality, additional dimensions in a way that doesn't affect their experience, nor their asset security and freedom. I think that's the most important.
I agree. I guess because you kind of, I think we're saying the same thing. Because, for example, what you're building is essentially the treaties in your game are fully permissionless, but they are also limited in scope and what they can touch, right? They essentially only govern social interactions and are always opt-in, right?
Exactly.
And so I guess, by the way, I fully agree that players in the end don't care about the permissionlessness or not of what builders are allowed to build on top of the game world that exists. I guess what they do care about is balance and having a fun game. And if you allow everyone to change the world in any way, you'll get these Minecraft public servers that essentially is like lava everywhere, and then just a bunch of penises built, right? So yeah.
We talk about it in a bit of a different way, which is we talk about the idea of a base layer and a builder layer. So there's a base layer that contains the world physics, and by that I mean it might be something like the speed at which a character can move from the east to the west of the map, and maybe that's a set number, or maybe it's affected by how much inventory they're carrying. So, the more they carry, the slower they go. And now, what combat looks like, that probably also, is about hit points and what weapon you have and what armor, and probably taking resources out the map. You don't want a situation where somebody could just build something that immediately took all the gold out the map. That's not desirable. That would cause immediate imbalance. So we talk about those things in the base layer as being immutable. That's the world physics that nobody gets to change, including us as builders. Once we set that in, that's it, set in stone. The game experiences that we create have to follow the same sort of rules as anybody else. But then, so there's this base layer, and then on top of that is the builder layer, and within that you can call on the things in the base layer, but they're sort of read only. They're not. You can't write to them. You can't change them. Now, I think we have a lot of debates here on the team talking about where's the line between those two layers? How much stuff do you let people mess with? The higher you put that bar, if you just have a very thin builder layer on top, then the scope of what you can do as a builder is probably limited. Too low, and it just becomes a sandbox full of lava and penises, to use your example. So I think figuring out what parts builders are allowed to affect is a difficult thing to answer, and probably you won't get right straight away, but that's like a fundamental question for anybody building an on-chain game, I think.
Yeah, a question about that is like, how do you, let's say, do you ever run into, or do you think people building on-chain games will run into situations where initially you set the bar very high, or the kind of like limited like space or dimensions for people to build, and then you want to kind of lower that, right, to open up more of the base layer, in your words, to people's like creativity, right? Like, what do you think the right process for that should be like, and like, or how do you think about it?
A good question. I think, first of all, I'd say we won't get it right the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth time. We might get it right on the sixth time, So I think that, we're thinking in seasons. Ultimately, we want this game world that's immutable and immortal, that just lives forever. But the reality is, we're probably going to get it wrong a few times, and figuring out where to draw the line, what things are immutable, which things that you can affect, is probably going to take some working out. And I think that if you're doing it with the right intentions and the community's behind you, then they're pleased that you're calling time on that version of the world and creating another season. So I don't think I have a good answer other than we'll build it with best guess, get it wrong a few times until we're happy with it, and that's the one that lives forever. But nobody's really done it before, so it's a tough question.
Actually, I want to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Amor.
I want to ask Yijia. So I didn't read too deeply on you guys' documentation. I was wondering, what is Treaty running on ZKs, and are you guys going to be launching on like your own side chain or L2, or because I'm curious what the back end of this is, because it's been really fun so far. Super accessible too, by the way. You were talking about that earlier. I feel like anybody could come into this, log in, and play it. So.
Yeah. Thanks for, I guess, enjoying the game. Yeah. So I guess this is a good segue into like talking about like the infra, which is, I think, the elephant in the room, like one of the biggest challenges for on-chain games. So we currently build on our own rollup, which can settle to any EVM chain, really. Currently, we're running a game that has no financial value, so we're not really settling anywhere. But once we do, we'll choose like an L2. The reason we're not directly building on an L1 or even like a decentralized L2 at the moment is because it's purely because of kind of gas limitations and contract size limitations, right? There is just Hemdall can attest, like the game right now, even on a custom rollup, is not super fast, and you can imagine like all of the hassle building on like a decentralized L2. And I think we also want to reimburse the gas for players to make sure that the experience is optimal, and it's much harder to do that on, I think, like a decentralized L2. Yeah, but I think I mean, like I'm curious about like David's you guys' approach with I think you're building on Polygon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
curious how that has been as well.
Yeah, I mean, we were on StarkNet, and I think that's that when we chose that because it was the most mature layer 2. I think, but we moved off that because at that time it didn't feel ready to ship a game. Well, it wasn't ready to ship a game, and so we moved to Polygon Proof of Stake. And I don't much like side chains, but ultimately it's a mature chain that we know that we can ship a game on. So, and it's on a public chain. So we haven't run into too many issues. We've, like all of us, I think, you build a game within the constraints of building on blockchain, right? So we haven't built a game that has 200 actions per minute. That's not going to work. So we know that a transaction time on Polygon is about 10 seconds. And so you build a game where it's not a problem that the things that you put in motion take 10 seconds to be verified. And we sort of disguise that by setting off a character. Let's say that I want that character to go from the east to the west on the map. Then even though it might take 10 seconds for it to be verified that it's starting that journey, obviously the character starts moving right away. If for some reason that transaction fails, then within the user interface we'll sort of reset it and rewind a bit. But
So
we
like client
found that
prediction.
yeah, exactly. So so that's I think sometimes we run into instances, and we could get a bit too technical on this call, but sometimes we run into instances where the computation required for a particular piece of gameplay is not efficient for a blockchain to run, which is where we use ZK proofs to move some of that computation away from the blockchain and onto the player's computer, which then gets built into a proof and verified on chain. That verifying on chain is a lot cheaper for processor intensive things than actually trying to do the processing on chain itself. So that's that for us, that's expanded the design space. We can do more complicated things by using that technique.
Yeah, wanted to add a bit, which is I think a lot of our current constraints with like building with Solidity with EVM is just the EVM itself, right? Like it's purely it's like completely single-threaded, meaning you cannot parallelize, and you oftentimes the performance just like does not match the modern kind of distributed compute system. So I think the next step for on-chain game teams, like whoever can find a way to either like significantly optimize the EVM so that it supports kind of much better and like much higher compute gameplay, especially for games like what we're building, like a 4x strategy where it's fairly high actions per minute. I think that's like a pretty big challenge, and yeah, like we're spending a lot of engineering time on that as well.
Well, and maybe the answer is not EVM, right? So,
right,
EVM,
that's
as
possible
you say,
too.
If the Starkware people were on this call, then they'd be pointing out the reason why they're on StarkNet is because it solves some of the problems that are inherent in EVM. So, I don't even think that's been fully worked out yet. What is the right environment for running these kind of games? I think the jury's out on that still. Everybody's experimenting. I don't know what Heimdall, what is Citadel on?
So all the assets are like native L1 Ethereum, but then we bridge them to L2 Polygon for the game state and gameplay. And we actually take the opportunity there with the bridge. So when you bridge your NFT shipped to the game, you are minted a soulbound governance token. So only the people that are in the game are able to vote and use governance powers. Yeah.
Do people trade on Polygon or Ethereum?
So at launch, you'll have to bridge out to go trade and sell on a secondary. But we're intending to have because we have a fully on-chain map, and the map is relatively large. It's about 24 hours across on average. We're gonna have on-chain outpost marketplaces. So assets will only be available in that marketplace if you list it there. So if you go to one space station, they'll have different assets for sale than another space station. eventually when we have items and stuff like that, that'll have, different items, and then that'll create like in-game arbitrage, so some areas might be more dangerous than others. So players will be like bringing, the items to a different marketplace and stuff like that. I think that it gives a lot more life to the game, having stuff like that. So, yeah.
One of the things that Nico and I have certainly spoken about in the past is this idea that you can, as a player, and in fact it came out because of a podcast I heard with Hilmar. He was from EVE Online, talking about the fact that a lot of the gameplay that exists in the game is where players want to do a certain thing, and so they in sort of social groups, and then subsequently the team that were building EVE Online build that stuff into the game so that the players can do the things they want. Here, I think something's different, where if you're building an on-chain game, then that you can build those structures yourself. So if you decide that, hey, you're a new player, good news, I'm going to help you quickly get to level 10, but you need to give me 10 gold, then you can build that into a smart contract. And now if you want to join that guild, then those are the rules of the guild, that's how it works. And you don't have to worry about the game maker kind of catching up with what the community wants to do. So I'm interested in, it's not just about game functionality, but it could be about social organization, and it could be about, hey, Heimdall, you were talking about, outpost or trading posts within your game that had local AMMs, if I understood correctly. So I could easily imagine that a guild could write dashboards that track the prices of different things in different places and use that piece of functionality as an advantage within their guild. So I think that we tend to focus on functionality that's all about allowing the game to do something different. But I think functionality could be all sorts of things in an on-chain game.
Yeah, I think totally. And these guilds could look something like sub-DAOs, right? And they could maybe make a proposal to the main DAO that say, we want to create a space station, let's say at this coordinate, and we're willing to pay this to the DAO for the right to own this space station. And, we'll get to set the taxes for the AMMs or whatever exists there. So there's all kinds of different things that can happen once you have like an on-chain base layer, like map that people can build on top of and do all these different kinds of things. So it's really exciting.
I have no idea what's going to be built. I think, and that's what makes it interesting, right? It's I don't know what our game looks like in a year's time, and if everything's gone right, we've developed 10% of it. 90% of it is what the community's built. Sure, we'll build some gameplay, some game experience to get the party started, but I want a game where we're the minority. We've just created a part that people like or don't like, but there's lots of other things to do in the game as well.
Yes. It's a shame we're running out of time here. I felt like I wanted to get your thoughts on incentivization of builders as well, because I feel there's different strategies here.
We can do a part 2. I mean, that's that's an hour right there. Right, it's a trustless incentivization of builders in an on-chain game. Holy cow!
We'll make it happen. We'll have to make it happen. By then, we'll hopefully have some updates from the three of you. And so Yijia, Heimdall, Scott, and David, thank you so much for joining. I came to a bunch of new conclusions, so it's really cool. Yeah, honestly, I've been thinking about this for a while, and this was great. So yeah, thank you so much for joining. And listener, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed and learned as much as I did. If you liked it, let us know. If you want a part 2, let us know. If you don't want to see these guys again, let us know as well. If I talk too much about on-chain games, you can also let me know. I'll be happy to know that. It was good. And we look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Ciao.